Well, isn't this a fun one? If you know nothing about the world of SCPs, then this video is going to be a lot to wrap your head around. If you've seen previous SCP videos, then you know exactly what you're in for. With goals to secure, contain, and protect. Get it? Because it's the name of the Foundation? Right on. Anyways, with that in mind, we can only hope that they would do just that. Especially if some of these horrific SCPs were real. Today on Life's Biggest Questions, we're asking what if SCP-173 was real in 2021? Smash that like button and let's get into it. Alright, first things first, let's talk about what this SCP is and does. As per the official website, SCP-173 is constructed from concrete and rebar with traces of Krylon brand spray paint. No one is sure of its origin, however, it is extremely hostile and somehow alive. The interesting thing about 173, aside from the fact that it's a living being made of concrete and rebar of course, is that it cannot move while directly in someone's line of sight. Protocol requires those who enter the container holding SCP-173 communicate with one another when they blink. Reports claim that 173 attacks its victims by strangulation or snapping their necks. As you can see, this is why the whole telling each other when you blink thing is important, otherwise you die. And no one wants that. Reports also claim hearing the sounds of scraping stone when no one is inside the container, but that appears to be normal and any lack of sound is to be reported to the higher ups at the SCP Foundation. The container is cleaned bi-weekly and a reddish-brown substance on the floor is a mix of feces and blood, which, where this comes from, no one really knows. Alright, so now you guys know what we're dealing with, which, let's be honest guys, even I don't know what we're dealing with here, but what happens if this thing is real in 2021? Well, as you can imagine, the possibilities are endless, and the majority of them aren't very good. Given that we don't even know what this thing necessarily is, it would be incredibly hard to combat it. Of course, this is assuming that the SCP Foundation wasn't already in possession of SCP-173. If that was the case, then it's quite possible that the SCP Foundation continues to monitor the subject, of course, keeping all the information classified. After all, we're talking about some secret government operations here. They're not just gonna let everyone know what's going on. Unless we storm the SCP Foundation. Too bad no one knows where it is. Now moving on, assuming that the Foundation contains this thing properly, then we wouldn't know any different and would just continue on with our everyday lives. However, if this thing were to escape or somehow manifest on Earth prior to the Foundation capturing it, then things would likely be very, very different. For starters, we don't even know where this thing originated. Is it an alien, an evil entity, or just some scrap from a construction site that wants vengeance? Who knows? What I do know is, given its hostile nature, it would likely start killing a lot of people very quickly. Given that it moves fast and snaps necks or strangulates people, it would go on a rampage, which at first would likely be considered a phenomenon. Maybe some would think it's the act of a person or a group of people, but after a while I think some would turn to prayer, fearing the end of times. I mean, even if someone were to initially see SCP-173, would anyone believe a person claiming an object made of concrete and rebar is moving around killing people? Think about that one. It'd be next to impossible to prove. Unfortunately, this would lead to countless innocent deaths unless the SCP had a change of heart and decided to not be so hostile. A situation like this could also potentially lead to the SCP Foundation to admit they exist in the first place and ask for the help of the general public in locating SCP-173. With the Foundation admitting to their existence, to no surprise, that opened up a whole new can of worms, but given the situation, I'd like to hope that most people's focus would be finding a way to contain SCP-173 before they focus on figuring out what the SCP Foundation is. Given that the only way this thing stops moving is if someone is watching it, eventually someone would spot it and hopefully others would be nearby as well. This way more than one person would be able to watch SCP-173 literally stopping it in its tracks while the SCP Foundation would finally have a chance to contain it. The beauty of this is it's a win-win for the SCP Foundation. The general public helps them find the SCP causing a rampage, they capture it, and then somehow find a way to make everyone forget about everything that happened. I'm sure they have some sort of, I don't know, neuralizer technology where they would just like flash something and everyone that was like looking at the SCP after it's contained just forgets where they are. Now maybe they don't make everyone forget what happened because, I mean, that'd also be very tough. There'd be way too much evidence between the newspaper, social media posts, photos, videos, absurd amounts of deaths, and so on. This isn't Men in Black, guys. Very different situation. It's 2021, not, I think Men in Black came out in like 97? I don't know, maybe 98. I could be wrong, but that's off the top of my head I'm guessing. Instead, the SCP Foundation would now have to answer a lot of questions, or maybe not. Much like Area 51, there's been tons of speculation about aliens and questions over the years to which the government has literally just ignored or brushed aside. It's possible the SCP Foundation does the same and claims this is the only instance where this has ever happened, which in reality, maybe they're containing hundreds of others. We may never know. What I do know is I'm glad this is hypothetical because what a scary time to be alive, eh? Let us know your thoughts on this one down below. For now, let's put out some comments from the video. What if the Titanoboa snake fought King Kong? Creature Challenge said, I'm pretty sure King Kong wins pretty easily. The Titanoboa would really pose no significant harm to King Kong since it's not venomous. I know, but like, if the snake could constrict King Kong around his arms, and if he couldn't do this, He's pretty useless, so that's, I don't know. But I think King Kong wins too. Fraven said, more like giant anaconda versus giant Bigfoot. Yeah, you're right. I said giant monkey against giant snake, but I feel like your comparison's better. I should have said Bigfoot. Ticket 2013 said, well, if it's Peter Jackson's King Kong at 25 feet, it would be even. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you scaled him to size, I really don't know who would win. Because if the Titanoboa like went for King Kong's neck, Kong could probably rip it out, but that would bleed, it would bleed a lot, it'd be a lot of damage. So I don't know. Maybe they both die. That happens in the wild. Sometimes the winner bleeds out and then they both just end up dying, right? Like two animals fight, one animal wins, but it's still badly injured and then it ends up dying from bleeding out. Anyways guys, my dog has decided to start barking now. I don't know if the mailman's here or it's just construction next door. So on that note, I'm gonna end this video. I've been your host, Jared Bronstein. You guys have been watching LBQ and we'll see you guys soon. And protect, wink wink. Oh, I'm supposed to do that.